Welcome to CinemaNed. Our story kicks off on a Monday. Detective David Mills has just started working alongside William Somerset, who is set to retire in a week. David and Somerset arrive at a crime scene where they find an overweight man dead at a table. Somerset isn't sure if it's a murder at first, but when he notices the man's hands and feet are tied with a rope, he becomes convinced it wasn't a natural death. Somerset carefully examines the body and asks David to question the neighbors about the victim. After they return from the scene, forensic tests reveal that the man was force-fed for hours. Eventually, the killer kicked him in the stomach, causing his death. Detective Somerset points out that the killer spent 12 hours feeding the victim, suggesting that such effort must have a deeper meaning. He predicts more murders will follow, as this one seems to be part of a larger plan. However, the captain disagrees, thinking the killer's motive was simply to torture the victim. The next day, on Tuesday, news of another murder surfaces. David heads to the scene where a notorious lawyer has been killed. The word greed is written on the carpet, and a picture of the lawyer's wife has glasses drawn on it. In the office, we see Somerset's name being removed from his door. The captain visits his office to inform him about the latest murder, where greed was written in blood. They don't want Somerset to retire because of his expertise. The captain also mentions that plastic pieces were found in the fat man's body, which were force-fed to him. This disturbs Somerset. He revisits the first crime scene and investigates further. There, he discovers the source of the plastic pieces and notices that the fridge has been moved. Behind it, he finds a note on the wall with the word greed written. Somerset returns and shows the note to the captain. The note reads, "The road is long and difficult, leading from hell to light." Somerset explains that this is just the beginning, as the murders are based on the 7 deadly sins: greed, gluttony, sloth, wrath, pride, lust, and envy. Despite this, he declines to continue with the case, citing his upcoming retirement in 5 days. That night, Somerset goes to the library to research the 7 deadly sins. Meanwhile, David carefully reviews photos of the crime scenes. Later, Somerset creates a list and leaves an important clue on David's desk. On Wednesday, David visits Somerset's office and suggests they work together until Somerset retires. The phone rings, and it's David's wife, Tracy, asking to speak with Somerset. She invites him to dinner that evening. During dinner, they have a long conversation. Tracy asks Somerset why he never got married. Both David and Somerset joke that Somerset is the kind of person no one would like. When Somerset asks how they're settling into their new apartment, the entire place starts shaking, revealing that it's located above the subway. David admits he didn't realize this when he bought the apartment. Somerset laughs and teases David, saying it's surprising that a detective didn't notice such a detail. After dinner, Somerset and David discuss the case. David shows him a picture of a scale with a pound of flesh, which was cut from the dying lawyer himself. There's also a note left by the killer. They are both amazed that the killer managed to come and go without leaving any evidence. Somerset notes, there's something specific they need to investigate further. David then mentions the glasses drawn on the lawyer's wife's picture. Somerset believes this is a clue, so they visit the lawyer's wife and question her about the pictures. She points out that a painting in her husband's office was hung upside down. After carefully examining the painting, they find nothing. David starts to believe the killer is toying with them. Then, Somerset discovers fingerprints on the wall where the painting was hanging. When they send the fingerprints to the lab, they are shocked to see that the prints spell out the words, "Help me." While waiting for the fingerprint results, David and Somerset discuss the significance of their work in the lobby. Somerset compares their search to looking for diamonds on a desert island. On Thursday, the fingerprints are matched to someone. However, Somerset doubts this person is the killer, reasoning that the murderer has a more calculated motive than a typical psychopath. They enter the suspect's apartment with a SWAT team and find the 3rd victim tied to his bed. David realizes from the killer's photos that the man has been lying there for a year, symbolizing the sin of sloth. Upon closer inspection, they discover the victim is still alive. A news photographer arrives quickly, surprising David, who angrily sends him away. Somerset explains that the news channel pays the police for information on big stories. The victim can't be interrogated as he had bitten off his tongue. According to the doctor, he must have endured immense pain before being brought to the hospital. Later that night, Tracy calls Somerset and asks to meet. In this city, Tracy only knows Somerset, and she just wants someone to talk to. On Friday morning, they meet for breakfast. Tracy is anxious about living in the city and is worried about raising her child here. Somerset shares his past with her and offers some thoughtful advice. Meanwhile, David is restless at the office, frustrated with everyone just sitting around, waiting for the killer to strike again. Somerset doesn't believe the killer is insane. He points out that the murderer must be extremely meticulous, considering how he kept a victim alive for a year, planted fingerprints, and went to great lengths to execute his plans. He describes the killer as cunning and ruthless. David disagrees, making a comment about library cards, which sparks an idea for Somerset. They head to the library, suspecting the killer might have read about the 7 deadly sins. Somerset jots down the names of the sins and, using David's money, pays an FBI agent to provide information on people who have checked out related books from the library. David is uneasy about this, knowing it's illegal. They go through the list and find one name that stands out: John Doe. David is still on edge. When he arrives at John Doe's door, he's unsure of what to say. Suddenly, a man carrying groceries pulls out a gun and starts shooting. He escapes, prompting David to chase after him. The man manages to ambush David, causing him to drop his gun. He holds David at gunpoint, but then unexpectedly runs away without harming him. David returns to John's door and argues with Somerset about whether they should break in. Somerset tries to reason with him, explaining that they have no warrant and their information was obtained illegally. However, David, fueled by anger, breaks down the door. To justify their entry, David fabricates a scenario involving a dummy suspect and calls in the detectives. The team begins searching John's apartment, which is dark but filled with disturbing details. Somerset finds fingerprints, and they also discover a photo of a woman on the last shelf. David uncovers numerous photos of the victims, while Somerset reads through the killer's diary. Suddenly, Somerset is called over, having realized that the news photographer they encountered earlier is actually the serial killer. However, a new problem arises. The forensic team can't find any fingerprints. Despite the tension, Somerset remains calm and continues reading the diary. David remains tense, while Somerset warns that the process will take time. Suddenly, the phone rings and the suspect himself is on the line. He commends the detectives for their efforts and apologizes to David for injuring him during the investigation. He mentions that these events forced him to accelerate his plans and tells them to brace for a surprise. On Saturday, the detectives receive a tip from a shop and a photo John had provided to create a special case. They soon learn about another murder and rush to the crime scene. This time, it's the sin of lust. They find a young woman with golden hair dead and a deeply disturbed man at the scene. While David interrogates the drugstore owner, Somerset speaks to the man found at the scene. The man, visibly shaken, reveals that John Doe forced him to commit the crime at gunpoint. Somerset shows David a picture of a custom-made strap-on weapon used in the crime. The two detectives discuss their next steps and how they might catch the killer. Their conversation turns philosophical, with Somerset reflecting on the state of the world. He remarks that it's easier to steal than to earn, easier to harm than to raise a child, and this bleak reality is part of why he's retiring early. David disagrees with Somerset, insisting that he should hold on to his ideals. Somerset appears restless. On Sunday, the detectives arrive at the next crime scene, representing the sin of pride. The victim, a woman, was given two grim choices: call for help and live with a disfigured face, or take her own life with a gun. On their way back to the office, Somerset tells David that he plans to stay on duty for a few more days, believing that if John Doe completes his 7th murder, the case will never be solved. As they are leaving, John suddenly appears and surrenders, drawing the detectives' attention. Calmly speaking, with blood on his shirt, John peacefully addresses the situation, while David yells at him to get on the ground. A team member handcuffs John as he talks to his lawyer. The detectives discuss John's reasons for surrendering. They realize they never found fingerprints because John had cut the skin off his fingers. The woman has no job or bank records, and all they know about John is that he's educated and wealthy. For the first time, David and Somerset see eye to eye. They understand that John won't stop until the story of the 7 sins is complete. John's lawyer informs the officers that 2 more bodies are hidden. John agrees to lead them to the bodies at 6 p.m. As the hour approaches, both detectives prepare, putting on their surveillance gear and armor. The car carrying John, David, and Somerset is escorted by a helicopter. During the drive, David and Somerset engage John in conversation. Somerset tries to extract more information, but John insists there's no point. David remains skeptical about whether John is genuinely leading them to the bodies. John explains his motive, promising that David will soon understand his final act. He admits he takes satisfaction in turning each sin against the sinner, but denies being insane. When David claims the victims were innocent, John becomes visibly angry for the first time. He argues that people tolerate grievous sins out of cowardice and hopes his actions will serve as an example to change this. To David, however, it's all just a twisted conspiracy. John reveals that he allowed himself to be caught, and that the only reason David is still alive is because John chose not to kill him. He wants David to remember him forever. Somerset remains calm but is deep in thought, processing everything. John eventually announces they've arrived at the destination, an isolated area with a high-voltage tower, a broken car, and an old trailer. Due to the power lines, the helicopter is unable to follow closely. David pulls John out of the car, ready for whatever comes next. David and Somerset follow John into the field. Suddenly, at 7 p.m., a van arrives and Somerset rushes to intercept it. The van stops and a delivery man steps out, saying he has a package for Detective David. Somerset lets the driver leave. At first, David is unsure about the package, but when he opens it with a knife, he's horrified by what he finds inside. Meanwhile, John continues to taunt David, praising his simple life and beautiful wife, Tracy. David becomes confused by this. John reveals that he met Tracy earlier that morning and tried to play the role of a loving husband. When that didn't work, he brought her head as a souvenir. Somerset steps in and tells David to drop his gun. David, still in shock, wants to know what's happening and what's in the box. John confesses that he too is a sinner, admitting that his sin is jealousy of David's ordinary life. David, now filled with rage, listens as John continues to provoke him. John says that he wants David to take revenge on him, to become the sinner of wrath. As John pushes David further by saying Tracy had prayed for both David and their unborn child's safety, David breaks down, crying. Despite his tears, David still holds the gun. It's then revealed that he didn't know his wife was pregnant. Somerset asks David for the gun and explains that John's victory can only be complete if David shoots him. In a moment of despair and fury, David shoots John multiple times, ultimately fulfilling John's master plan. In the film's final scene, David is seen sitting in a police car, with the captain assuring him that he will be taken care of. Hemingway once wrote that the world is a good place and worth fighting for. Somerset agrees with the second part, and with that, the film comes to a close. Friends, if you enjoyed this explanation of the film, please like and share the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.